good candidates. So again, we will see maybe what could be said. Maybe not everything is allowed to be said, but we will see. Definitely, His Excellency will share some of his views on the following topics. So to the schedule, so we will start with the presentation, and then, of course, will be the time for the discussion. I have to stress that the presentation will be relatively short, and Mr. Schapiro will expect your questions and is prepared to answer them. But before I will pass the floor to him, so allow me to say a few words about Mr. Schapiro. So Andrew Schapiro grew up in the Chicago metropolitan area, and what is very interesting that his roots are from here, because his mother was born here in Prague. Mr. Schapiro graduated from Homewood Flossmoor High School in 1981 and earned a BA in history at Yale University in 1985. Then he attended University of Oxford on a Marshall Scholarship, earning his MA in philosophy, politics, and economics in 1987. He then entered Harvard Law School, where he served on the law review with Barack Obama. Mr. Schapiro was awarded a JD degree in 1990. Then he served as a law clerk to Judge Richard Posner of the United States Court of Appeals for the Seventh Circuit and to Justice Harry Blackmun of the United States Supreme Court. He then worked as a public interest lawyer in the office of the Federal Public Defender in New York City. Andrew Schapiro was sworn in as U.S. Ambassador to the Czech Republic on August 14, 2014, and presented his credentials to President Miloš Zeman on September 30, 2014. Ladies and gentlemen, U.S. Ambassador in the Czech Republic, Mr. Andrew Schapiro.
Shall I stand up? I have this. Stand up. Yeah.
You can stand up.
So they gave me this nice high-tech microphone. I haven't used too many of these, so maybe I'll stand up for a little bit just so I can see all of you and the people in the back can see me. Thank you very much, Vice Rector. I want to congratulate you, and I want to congratulate everyone in this room, because you are the future, not just of the Czech Republic, but this is a very international school. It's a fantastic example of what can happen when you open up your doors to the best and the brightest, and you bring them in and expose them to the latest in teaching and thinking. So it's very exciting for me to come and talk to a group like this. And it's especially exciting for me because I first came to this country in the 1980s as a student with a backpack. I was just a tourist, and I was with some friends traveling around Europe, and they wanted to go to Italy. I think we were in Vienna, and they wanted to go to Italy, and I said, I want to go see Czechoslovakia at the time, Prague, because my mother was born here, and my mother left as a little girl in 1939. So I came with my backpack. It was very hot. I remember one day in August standing in the middle of Charles Bridge at 3 in the afternoon, and there were about 3 people on the bridge, and they were all from East Germany, actually. You could not do that now at 2 in the morning. You can't even walk across it. And I remember when I looked at this city, I saw so much beauty, but it was also a little bit sad because people were frightened. They didn't want to speak to an American. Many people who I spoke to, you could tell they were very curious about what was going on in the West, because there were so many things that they didn't have. They wanted to learn, they wanted opportunity, but they weren't able to travel. They weren't able just to go to school as they wished and study wherever they wanted. They weren't able to speak freely and truthfully. So to be here now in this position at a school like this, teaching modern capitalism to people from everywhere around the globe, it's very special. So I want to just talk a little bit about the U.S.-Czech relationship, and then we can open it to questions. When Americans look at the Czech Republic, Czechia, as it's called now, we see a country in the center of Europe. But when I first learned that this job might be a possibility for me, it was 2013. I first got a phone call from some people I knew in Washington. They said, "Would you be interested in this?" I said, "Of course." But I thought, well, it will be very interesting. It will be a chance to do some public service, a chance to live in a place where I have family connections, but nothing is happening in Europe. Europe will be very, very boring, because we thought everything had, history had stopped here. And then, boom, you have the crisis in Ukraine. Boom, the Greek financial crisis. Boom, migration, terrorism, Brexit, Turkey. It keeps coming and coming. And anyone who thought that history is finished in Europe has had a very sudden awakening. And this country now is not just in the center of the map, but in many ways it's at the center of some of the most important issues that face us. So I'll talk about a few of those, but I want to say something first to those of you who are not from Czechia, something that I learned in my first year, and that is this country is not just Prague. So I encourage all of you to do what I did. I made a point in my first 12 months to visit all 14 kraje. So these are the places that I visited in my first year. And I think if you're a diplomat or if you're a business person or an academic, whatever you're going to be, you can't think that you know everything about a country just by sitting in the capital. If you go to Madrid, you don't know all about Spain. If you go to London, you don't know England. Certainly if you go to Beijing, you don't understand all of China. You need to get out and see different cities and see different regions. I've tried to do that, and not just talk, but listen. And when I go out to the regions, I try to remind people a little bit of our history, the strong historical ties between our countries. This is a postcard of American President Wilson and Czech President Tomáš Masaryk, because they worked together in some ways to bring independence to Czechoslovakia after World War I. Masaryk did a wonderful job lobbying, persuading world opinion that the people in this region should be independent and free, and President Wilson and others were supporters of that. Unfortunately, in many ways, the West failed Czechoslovakia in the 1930s. Certainly those of you who are Czech know the stories of 1938, 1939. I know from my own families that the Czechs were threatened by a very aggressive neighbor, and the world did nothing to help. And the Czechs were ready to fight in 1938 when they had defensible borders, but no one was there to help at all. But I'm proud that we did come back. Unfortunately, we had to lose many lives, but fighting World War II. And many young Americans came thousands of miles to a country they knew nothing about, not to conquer land, not to take resources, but to free people from a terrible oppressor, from the Nazis and from Hitler. This is a photograph of troops in Pilsen. And for many years, people in Czechoslovakia were not allowed to tell the true history, which was that the western parts of this country were liberated by American and actually in Belgian, American, Belgian, and British troops. But during communism, people couldn't speak the truth. And so they had to just say, well, the whole country was liberated by the glorious Red Army. And I met a man when I was in Pilsen for some liberation events last year. And he said that when he was a little boy, 7 or 8 years old, he was in school, and he was in history class, and the teacher said, and then Pilsen was liberated by the Soviet Army. And the boy raised his hand, and he said, I think we were liberated by the Americans. And the teacher said, who told you that? And he said, my father. And the teacher said, you tell your father he needs to come see me on Monday. But the boy was not afraid. He said, "No, I know it's true because in our house we have a jacket and a hat from this American soldier that he gave our family as a souvenir." So now the teacher had a difficult situation. What could he say? So he said, "Well, that was just the Soviets pretending to be Americans to confuse the Germans." So you can see how if you live in a society where you can't speak the truth, you get tangled up into all kinds of crazy stories. But the good news is that people were patient and waited and continued to want to be free. And finally, in 1989, there was the wonderful Velvet Revolution, which captured the imagination of the entire world. These are a few photographs. You can't see them so well, but this was in 1990. As some of you know, there were two President Bushes. There was a father and the son. And so this was when the father came to Prague, and you see all these people in Václavské náměstí who came out. This picture down in the corner, I don't think you can see it, but some people have fantastic 1990 haircuts. The haircuts are classic. I used to have a haircut like that. So, and the historical ties between the Czech Republic and the United States continue today. We continue to get along at a very high level as much as we can. And we have some strong ties that go beyond just an ambassador who has family ties here. John Kerry, he discovered late in life that his grandfather on his father's side was from Horní Benešov. He worked in a brewery. His grandfather helped to make beer in Czechoslovakia. Madeleine Albright, of course, the first female Secretary of State in the United States, was born here. Her father was a Czech diplomat. She has very strong ties and continues to be connected to this country. So that's how we've gotten here. Now, as some of you might have heard, we have an election coming up. It will be in less than 3 weeks. And one of these people will be the next president of... Despite what the vice rector said, I am very limited in what I can say about the election. I am not allowed, because I am a diplomat here representing the whole country, to speak in support of one candidate or another, although I will be happy to answer your questions. You can try to get me to say some things, and we'll see how close you get. But there is one thing that I'm absolutely allowed to say, and that is that I'm going to miss this guy a lot, no matter what happens. This is a picture of President Obama at Hradčanské náměstí in 2009. This was, in fact, his first trip. His first foreign trip as president was to Prague, where he announced a very important initiative to try and reduce the number of nuclear weapons in the world. And you see all the people who came out, and I am extremely proud to have worked for this president who I think has done so much for my country and for the world. And it's been interesting to see, you know, his approval ratings have been going up, up, up over the last few months. And I think it's because people are looking at the election and they say, oh, well, maybe he's not so bad, this guy. So that happens always. As a president gets ready to leave, almost every time the approval ratings rise, and then after they leave office, their approval ratings get very high. All right, I want to talk about a few challenges that we face and that we're working on together with the Czechs. And the first has to do with Ukraine. We want to have a strong and good relationship with Russia and with all of the countries of the world. But we need to solve this issue of Russia's aggression in Ukraine against against a European neighbor. ISIL and terrorism, a problem that I think everyone is aware of. All you need to do is pick up the newspapers. So I want to talk a little about how we're working with our allies on that issue. Climate change. You might be surprised to see climate change listed as an issue here, but honestly, if we talk about what is the biggest threat to all of you, to your generation and to your children, more than these other ones that I've listed, the one that is most likely to actually harm you or harm your children is climate change. There's some worries that we have about that, but there's also some good news about the world coming together, finally, to deal with this problem. Economic growth. I'm talking at a university that focuses on this, so let's talk about those shared challenges. And then finally, transparency. What can we do about good government and rule of law? Oh, and then the topic that is radioactive now comes up in every conversation about everything, refugees. All right, so first I was speaking about Russian action in Ukraine, and Prime Minister Sobotka said something that I think is hard to argue with, and that is that because of its membership in NATO now, the Czech Republic, which was not really able to stand on its own in the 1930s and then was dominated by another country for 40 or 50 years after World War II, has the most reliable security guarantees in its history. And I'm very happy to say that this country now has become a great partner with ours and with other members of NATO. So these are some photographs of, I had the opportunity to visit Afghanistan and meet with the Czech troops and the American troops who are working together in Afghanistan. The Czechs have a marvelous special forces group called the 601st. I've gone out and visited with them, and Czechs are justifiably very proud of their special forces. We're also proud of the way we've worked together. The United States has provided, over the last 5 years, a little more now than 2 billion Czech crowns in security assistance to help the Czech military modernize and exercise. We've participated in more than 50 exercises together, including a very important one that was held in Germany last year that was directed by a Czech colonel, Josef Kopecký, 5,000 troops from 8 different NATO countries, performing at the highest level. And this is something I really want to stress to the Czechs in the room. When I speak with NATO commanders or with American commanders, I always hear that the level of professionalism and discipline of the Czech soldiers is first rate. It's second to none, and you should be proud of it. So what has happened here is that this is good for an economic university also. This country has gone from being a consumer of security to being a provider, to helping not just in Afghanistan, but in Mali, in Sinai, working together to try and keep the world a more peaceful and free place. All right, the second challenge I mentioned had to do with terrorism, and if you just read the headlines, you would think that the world is falling apart. But I want to bring a little bit of good news. You know, there's been a coalition of 65 countries that have joined together, led by the United States. The Czech Republic is one of those countries, that have been fighting ISIS and driving them back in Iraq and in Syria. And since May of 2015, so more than a year ago, ISIS has lost well over half the territory that it used to control. More than 100 of their top leaders have been killed, have been taken out, and they continue to be on the defensive. I'm sure you know from reading the papers that the battle for Mosul has begun. It's going to be a difficult battle, but it will eventually be won, and ISIS will be thrown out of Mosul. But the danger there, one of the dangers, of course, is because of this fight, you have refugees, and you also have ISIS looking to try and gain headlines in new ways. If they can't get a headline by taking over a town in the Middle East or chopping off people's heads in the desert, then they might say, well, here, an easy way for us to get some headlines is to blow up some innocent people at a concert, or go shoot up people at an airport. We need to continue to work closely together. And here again, the cooperation between US and Czech forces is excellent. You can rest assured that our intelligence officials speak very closely with each other about any perceived threats that we have here. But also, and I think this is very important, that as we respond to this threat, we try to do it in a way that remains true to our values, that we don't lose our minds the way the terrorists would like us to and just start lashing out against anyone, or forget about human rights, forget about tolerance. We can't. Climate change. I mentioned it earlier. There have been 2 very important agreements, 3 actually, that have been reached in the last year. There was an accord reached in China between the US and China to reduce global emissions. That's a great example of what happens when big, powerful nations work together, because we're going to need to work together on this problem that crosses borders. Then there was the Paris Climate Agreement, again, through diplomacy, led by the United States and Secretary Kerry, which makes me very proud, but all of the countries of the world finally came together on that. And then just last week, a new agreement on fluorocarbons. These are the chemicals or the gases that are used in air conditioners and refrigerators. It sounds like a small thing, but they actually, it's very dangerous to the environment, and there was a historic agreement just reached to limit those. Your generation is going to need to continue to work on that. Now, economic growth is another challenge. And with the Czech Republic, we have growing bilateral trade, more than 150 billion crowns. Our exports to the Czech Republic are up. Czech exports to the United States are up even more. As you know, this is an export-driven economy. I'm not sure everyone knows how big a market the United States is. I'm very proud of the fact that the United States is now the largest non-European market for Czech exports. Obviously, the EU is the biggest market, and neighbors like Germany especially, but outside of Europe, the United States is a big and growing market for Czech companies. And for all of you who are going to go on and start companies here, I urge you to look at the United States. It's a big market, and hopefully one that we can continue to open up. Going the other way, the United States is the largest non-EU direct foreign investor in the Czech Republic. That's also something that I think a lot of people don't know. But we're pleased about that. So these are good US companies investing here, creating jobs, and adding value for Czechs here, so that you have in many of these companies employing thousands of Czechs, and each of those persons goes home and supports a family. But there's more that we can do. First thing that we need to do is reduce trade barriers. You've probably heard of, or maybe you've heard of, an important trade agreement called TTIP, the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership. TTIP is a free trade agreement that would make one free trading zone between the EU on one hand and the United States on another. It's a wonderful opportunity. I hope that we can take advantage of this opportunity. You would have 500 million consumers in the EU, 350 million in the United States. It's almost 1 billion people. And TTIP is focused not so much on tariffs and taxes, because we don't have a lot of tariffs and taxes between Europe and the US, but it's more on what we call non-tariff barriers, like regulations. So I like to give an example. If I come here and I rent a car because I want to drive to Karlovy Vary, the car meets European safety standards. I'm 100% confident that it's a safe car. I don't have a problem with that. And if you go to Florida and you rent a car because you want to drive to Disney World, I hope that you're 100% confident it's a safe car, even though it meets American standards, not European standards. Why do the manufacturers have to make two different kinds of cars? It's very expensive. It's very inefficient to have to run one production line for Europe, one production line for America. We should be able to find a common standard and harmonize it. I spoke to the head of the biggest hospital bed company in the region. It's a very famous company here, Czech company. And he told me the same thing. He says, we have great hospital beds. They meet the EU standards. We have to run a different production line to sell in the United States to meet American standards. I'm sure a hospital bed here and a hospital bed there, it's fine. Just pick one and we can do it. Now, the next thing we need to do to continue to grow economically is to increase innovation and entrepreneurship. And here I hope that I'm speaking to a receptive audience. Probably many of you are going to open businesses or work in businesses that are part of this innovation economy. And what can you do to have an environment that fosters innovation and entrepreneurship? I think you need a few things. You need an open society, like I see when I look around this room, that takes people with talent regardless of where they are from. You need a good educational system. Again, I see that in this room. One other thing you need is a culture that makes it okay to fail. And I'm not so sure I think in Europe and in this country, sometimes people are a little more afraid to take risks than they are in mine. I'm not sure about your generation, but that would be one thing that I think that's one area where I think there's still more progress to be made, because many of the people who've started the greatest companies in the world didn't get it right on their first try, maybe not even on their second. Then the final thing you need to have an atmosphere, an environment where you can have innovation and entrepreneurship is rule of law. And that's why our embassy and our country tries to work closely with other partners that we have here, because corruption is a global challenge. I come from Chicago, Illinois. Okay, the last 2 governors of my state, I think actually 3 governors of my state in the last 30 years have been sent to prison. So we know a lot about corruption because we faced it. But what that means is that we've learned some lessons from fighting that battle. So I don't want to come in any way and preach to people and say, you do this, you do that. Instead, I want to say, we've learned some things. Maybe we can share best practices. In fact, today, this morning, I hosted a breakfast at my residence with some Czech judges, prosecutors, and police investigators who had just gone on a trip to the United States to meet with American judges, prosecutors, and police investigators and share ideas about how to fight corruption. And the Czech ranking is improving. If you've read in Transparency International, ranking in terms of corruption is going up. I'm optimistic, especially if all of you take a stand and say this is not acceptable. Some of this is culture. If everybody thinks the person next to them is dishonest or stealing, they say, well, why should I be just the one person who doesn't give a bribe or take a bribe? Need to change the culture, and that is happening here, slowly but surely. And we care, not just because this is an economic issue and not just because of fairness, but also it's an issue of security. I think we saw this in Ukraine. When a country gets hollowed out, people lose faith in the honesty of their government. It makes it easier for illegitimate actors or even other countries to come in and disrupt what the government is doing. All right, the final topic I said I was going to talk about is the radioactive topic of the day, and that is refugees. And it's actually been very interesting for me to watch here. Obviously, I say this as the child of a refugee, but in this country, someone said to me recently, he said, well, we have here a refugee crisis with no refugees. Because this is just the fact. There are probably, you could count on one hand the number of refugees who are here or who are trying to come here. I think in order to address this problem, one thing we all need to do is lower the rhetoric, lower the temperature, treat it as a practical problem that requires a practical solution. It's not going to be solved by hysteria. Then we're also going to need to address the problem at the source by trying to end the war in Syria, of course. The United States has provided over $5 billion in humanitarian assistance to Syria and the region. It's the largest single donor of humanitarian assistance in the world by far, and we just had a large summit on refugees in New York in September of 2016. But this problem is one that's going to be with us for a long time, and it's not going to be solved by any easy solution by just putting up walls or closing our borders. I want to remind you, as people get frightened, and of course, look, let me say one thing very clearly. It is 100% legitimate to say a country needs to know who is coming in. You need to know who's coming into your country. It's 100% legitimate to say that these numbers are not sustainable in the long run, the numbers that you've had here. But it's also true that there is some upside to taking in people from around the world. More than 40% of Fortune 500 companies were founded by immigrants or their children. Think of, in my country, it's been one of our secrets. So Sergey Brin, co-founder of Google, where was he from? Russia. He came when he was 6 years old with his family. He was an immigrant to the United States. Andy Grove, he was the co-founder of Intel from Hungary. His family were Hungarian refugees. Elon Musk of Tesla Motors, he emigrated from South Africa, then to Canada, then to the United States. Indra Nooyi, she's the CEO of Pepsi. She's from India. Here's one, I don't know if I should be proud of this, or not, but Ray Kroc, the chairman of McDonald's, the founder of McDonald's, actually. The guy who's, do you know where he's from? Here. His family is from Bohemia, Ray Kroc. And then finally, Steve Jobs. Does anyone know where Steve Jobs' father was from? Syria. Steve Jobs' father was Syria. So all of these people, good, patriotic Americans, making our country stronger and better. You know, I say, hey, bring me some more of these. Economic refugees, I'll take an economic refugee. That's great, because these are people who are hungry, who are ambitious, and are going to build the next Google, Intel, McDonald's, Apple. I'm going to end just by reminding myself and reminding all of us that you will have a chance, as I think I do as well, in whatever job you take, to do some good and not just enrich yourself and enrich your family. There will be times where you have a chance to have some impact on the world. This is my mother's visa, issued in 1934 from the embassy in which I work now. So in August of 1939, when her country had already been occupied by, you know, a bunch of crazy people who wanted to kill a 5-year-old girl because she was a Jew. If she had not gotten out, you know, the odds are very high that she would have ended in the gas chambers, and I wouldn't be here. Someone at the United States Embassy, and it was actually called the consulate at that time because Prague was not a capital anymore. Berlin was the capital. American consulate at Prague, Bohemia, somebody issued that visa that saved my mother's life. And I try to remember every day, I keep that framed in my office, that we can deal with big issues in what we do, but we can also touch individual lives in small ways. And that doesn't just go for a diplomat, it goes for you. When you're working in a company and you see somebody doing something wrong, it goes for you if you're an academic, it goes for you if you're in government. So let's work together, continue to be great partners, whatever country you're from. We can make this world a better place if you all pay attention and keep working hard. So follow us on social media. This has been a pleasure, but now comes the really fun part. I think we have definitely some time for questions about whatever you want. There's no such thing as an off-limits question. Don't worry about being polite. You can ask me about anything you want. If I can't answer it, I won't answer. But thank you for your attention.
So thank you very much, Your Excellency. And now floor is yours, so you can ask. Please, the mic is there, microphone. So raise the hand, and then you can pose your question or questions.
And I'm also interested to hear from you, even if it's not a question. I'm curious to know what's on your mind. You know, your generation. What are the things that you think about or worry about or hope for when you think about the next 10, 20, 30 years? And what do you think of America? Good and bad.
So I can see two hands,
Yes.
so please, you can start. You can start.
First of all, hello, Mr. Schapiro. I have a question to the debate between the two candidates for the president elections. My question is, I don't know which debate it was, but I think it was the second one, where Donald Trump was talking to Hillary Clinton, and she was arguing that as he is a businessman with a huge corporate business behind his back, he isn't paying taxes. And his reaction was, because I'm not stupid. So what do you think about a person who, let's say, is able to say something in front of millions of in front of millions of Americans? So, yeah.
Ha. All right. This will test me as a diplomat. I think it is important for well, look, business people have different responsibilities. On the one hand, a business person has to do what she or he can to grow and protect the business. But you're also citizens of the community in which you live. And I know that after that statement, some people who are much wealthier than that candidate, for example, Warren Buffett, one of the richest people in the world, issued a letter saying, well, I'll tell you the deductions I do and don't take, and there are some loopholes or tricks that I would be able to do that I don't think it's right to do. It's not for me really to judge that. That's really going to be for the American people to judge. I've been fascinated by the level of attention that our election gets here. It's a reminder to me, you know, that the U.S. has a pretty large impact on the world. You know, during the primary season, I was getting questions from students about small details, and I love that you're watching and paying attention to the debates. That's the best I can do on that one now. But you can keep them coming.
Okay, another question was over there.
I want to ask you about Russia and Ukraine. What are the main goals to reach the friendship about the countries with like from United States to Russia and Ukraine, and what can you say about the situation in Ukraine from your thoughts?
Yes. So
thank you.
Thank you. You know, the various sides came together a little more than a year ago in Minsk, and they agreed that the first step needs to be implementing a series of agreements which include the withdrawal of heavy weaponry, the return of control of the international border to Ukraine, the release of any hostages. And unfortunately, there hasn't been much progress towards that. And unfortunately also, most of the violations, including continuing violations of the ceasefire, have come from the side of the Russian-backed separatists. It's not acceptable in post-World War II Europe for one country to just annex one of its neighbors. Okay, the United States will never recognize the annexation of Crimea. You can't do that. That's not how you change borders. And the United States will not support the destabilization of a European country like Ukraine. What happened? Ukraine was interested in associating more closely with the West. Its people said, well, we want to be, you know, we want an accession agreement to enter the EU. We'd like to be more close to the West. And unfortunately, that for whatever reason, the Kremlin didn't want to let that happen. And for a while, they said, well, there are no Russians in Ukraine. And then, well, okay, there are Russians in Ukraine, but they're on vacation. And then, okay, they're not on vacation, but they were invited there. You know, I know I have people from many countries in this room, so I don't want to offend anyone, but our position is accurate, I think, and supported by the facts. There are real facts out there, which is that Russia has been destabilizing Ukraine. But I think that the problems can be resolved. You know, the Minsk Accords are pretty clear. And Crimea, there's a separate set of sanctions relating to them. As I said, we are not going to recognize the occupation, purported annexation of Crimea. But the Minsk Accords, if there's a will and a willingness on the part, I would say primarily of the Kremlin, Ukraine has to do its part too. That government, will be the first to say, still has a long way to go in terms of reform and anti-corruption. There can be a resolution, but we are not, the United States is not going to make a deal that gives away Ukraine or gives away Crimea. We're not going to make a deal that gives away at the expense of Europe, and we're not going to make a deal at your expense. That doesn't work. We've learned too many times that if you just give in to some country that's aggressive, they learn the wrong lesson, which is we can do it more. So if you're a Czech, you should know also, we're not going to make a deal, you know, that leaves you standing out there either. Thanks.
Hello. I would like to ask you about ISIS. And how do you think an organization such as ISIS was allowed to spread and propagate and gain the military might it possesses today?
Yeah. So I'm not an expert on not just the Sunni-Shia conflict, but divisions within the Sunni world. It's certainly true that after Saddam Hussein was removed from power. I think many people looking backwards will say that not enough was done to integrate and co-opt, in a way, the Ba'athist, those who had been members of Saddam Hussein's own party. So some of these people felt left out. So very quickly, I think you had a region where there was a group of people who, some of whom had been pushed from power, also others who were young and looking for whether it was either adventure or had some religious fervor that ISIS spoke to. And then finally, there's a bit of a social media part of it. You know, it's been crazy to watch how we used to think Al-Qaeda was the worst thing out there, and then ISIS said, well, we're going to do more than you. We're going to start putting up on YouTube these horrifying videos, which has become a recruiting tool for ISIS. So I think more than many people anticipated, that type of use of media drew a lot of young and crazy people to this group who believed they were going to be part of building this Islamic caliphate. I don't think that we'll make that kind of, well, I think we need to be attentive in the future. It is one example of how sometimes when there's a vacuum, forces can move in that are even more vicious and terrible than you might have imagined. But you know, there's an important point to take away from all of this, which is, no matter what some people might say about, oh, well, ISIS came up because maybe the West should have done this differently, or the US should have done this differently, or the Iraqi government should have done this differently, or somebody else should have done something differently. You can think about that all day you want, but the people who are to blame for cutting off people's heads and burning people and drowning people are the people who are cutting off people's heads and burning people and drowning people. There has to be some responsibility here. So, yeah.
Hello, I'm from Korea, South, and I heard that Obama talked about Korean education system, and since I'm from Korea, I was really interested in his opinion, and I found one news article that says Obama often used the Korean education to prod Americans educators to make more efforts. And basically, he called for the United States to look to South Korea in adopting longer school days and after-school programs for American children to help them survive in an era of kin-clover competition, blah, blah, blah. So basically, he praised the South Korean education system, which put students in school over 13 hours a day. And I really like him, but I don't know about this opinion. I really want your opinion on his opinion and the education system between the two countries.
Well, certainly my children, who are 15 and 13, would be very unhappy if I endorsed a 13-hour school day. You know, they would say, Dad, no, no. Look, I'm not familiar with those specific comments of President Obama, but I think that we in the United States have come to realize that if we want to continue to compete in the 21st century in what I hope will be an open global economy, we're going to need to make some improvements to our educational system. Whether that means adopting taking some of the best ideas from different countries, you know, from whether it might be South Korea or places in Europe or elsewhere. I'm not an educational expert. I can say this. We can, I'm not saying anything that hasn't been said before, we can do a much better job in the US, I think, on teaching science, technology, engineering, and math, what people call STEM sometimes. I think we can also do a better job of educating and opening all fields to young women and girls so that we're taking advantage of everyone in our society. I probably would not want to go, I don't want to stereotype what the South Korean educational system might be like, but I would hate to lose something that I think is one of our strengths. And that is, the American system allows people to be pretty open, creative, it's flexible. It might not be as good at teaching people, you know, advanced level mathematics, maybe as some places in the world, but perhaps at encouraging not just creative thinking, but what I described before, which is this willingness to fail, to take some risks, we're pretty good. I find even in Europe, you have to decide, those of you who are Czech or Slovak or Russian or French or whoever's here, I think in most European countries, you decide at maybe age 15 or 16, before you go to university, what you will specialize in. Am I right? I think that's the case. If you want to be a biologist, you decide before university that you're going to study biology. If you want to be a lawyer, you decide before university. It's not that way in the US. In the US, you go to university and you do your first 2 years, and you maybe take a class in poetry, and you take a class in physics, and you take a class in psychology, and then after those 2 years, you say, okay, well, this is the path I want to choose. I personally think that's a nice way to do it, because when I was 16, I don't think I had any clear idea of what I wanted to do. Maybe I still don't.
Good afternoon, Mr. Schapiro. Thank you for coming. It's an honor for us. I've got 3 questions for you. First one will be your opinion about ties between US and Czech Republic, considering our current president and your future president, either one of them. The second one would be your opinion about possibility of defending the Baltic states or the eastern part of Poland, considering Crimea. And the third question is, who are you going to vote for in presidential elections? And if you can't answer that, then could you tell us who are you not going to vote for, please? Thank you. Thank you very much.
Nice. All right. So the first question about the president here, it used to be the first question I would get anywhere I went. Now the first question is always about the American elections, and that was true here also. But it used to be people would ask me about relationships with President Zeman, and what I will say is I want to have a good relationship with all leaders in this country. I think we do have, our embassy has a great relationship with the Czech government, which is the body that actually makes policy here. But I'm also going to continue to speak my mind. You know, I mean, the only way you will not upset someone as an ambassador is if you stay in the embassy and never go out and never say anything and just go to cocktail parties in the evening, and then you finish and you've wasted your time. So I'll still speak out about what our country believes, and I hope that all of our partners here will understand that we're speaking as a friend, because we are a friend to this country, and friends can talk to each other like adults and say, I think this is a good idea, I think this is not a good idea. The next election, I also hope that, you know, how the relations will be. Whoever wins the American election, I'm comfortable that this relationship is strong enough so that it will do well regardless of who the president is, regardless of what different people might have said during the campaign, people from this country or people elsewhere. We need to act like adults. That's the most important thing. And adults don't hold grudges and I'm confident that whoever the American president is will reach out to Czechia and say, let's keep doing all the good things we're doing. The Baltics, Poland, look, they have real reason to be worried. It's been fascinating for me because there are different attitudes in different countries, and so the Czechs, I find, are kind of in the middle here. Some other countries aren't worried very much about what happened in Ukraine, but certainly in Poland and in the Baltics, people and the governments are extremely worried. They feel that any day they could wake up and find themselves in the same situation as Ukraine. And that's why we, along with our NATO allies, have implemented the European Reassurance Initiative, the ERI, which is to bring greater troops, greater prepositioning of weapons and material in the Baltics, in Poland, rotating out troops more often, because this is a really important point. you increase the risk of war. You increase the risk of a conflict if the other side is uncertain of where your red lines are. You know, I think the greatest way we can preserve the peace. There's no accident that the first place President Obama went after what happened in Crimea on his way to the NATO summit in Wales was Estonia to make a big speech. He was standing there so that nobody gets the wrong idea. You cannot attack or destabilize a NATO country. I think that's better for peace, and we need to be very, very clear, and that way you will not have some miscalculation by someone who says, well, maybe if I can cause a little trouble here or a little trouble there, I'll get away with it. It's better to be clear. Your final question, who am I going to vote for? I will of course answer that. I am going to vote for the best candidate. So
maybe to the second question, but one of the candidates, who is Donald Trump, said that maybe that NATO will not defend, let's say, some of the countries based on the contract where NATO is based on, because he argued that that, let's say, not those 2% of GDP are spent and the US is financing everything and so on. So what is your opinion on that? Is just pre-election speech or it may be true?
So this I am allowed to answer, and it is the clear US policy that the NATO treaty is a binding obligation on all members that says an attack against one is an attack against all. We will absolutely honor our NATO obligations. If any NATO member is attacked and invokes Article 5, which is the part of the NATO treaty that says an attack on one is an attack on all, we are obligated to defend that country, and we will defend that country. Anybody who says otherwise is mistaken. Now, there's one grain of truth in this, which is we have been saying for a long time that NATO countries need to live up to their promise to spend more on defense. And all NATO countries made an agreement that they would spend at least 2% of their GDP on defense, with much of that going towards modernization. And only 4 or 5 NATO members have met that. The US spends much more than that on that. And there is some danger that I would probably say to all those of you who are from NATO countries that if over a long period of time NATO members don't pitch in and share some of the burden, that you might have more and more people in America who are getting frustrated and saying the kind of things that you did hear from one candidate, which is, well, why should we be spending so much money to defend other people? Are they free riders, really? You're economic students, you know. Do we have other countries that are free riders? But that is a separate debate that we can have as we work together as allies. It has no bearing. NATO is not pay to play. You only get defended if you're at your 2%. No, the Article 5 is binding and unbreakable.
So, please, other questions?
You gonna? Can we? I don't want to offend anybody from Russian Federation, but I see Russian Federation as the greatest threat, let's say, to the eastern parts of Europe. And can we? I don't know. Compare with their plan implemented, spending, I don't know, $20 billion in next 4 years on modernization of their armies. If even spending 2% of our GDP, I think we as a European Union are not unified enough with our current, well, I don't know, president, and I don't know.
Yeah. So look, I want to be clear. If I speak about, I never want to be seen to be speaking about Russia as a whole or the Russian people, because Russia is a country with a wonderful history, tradition, culture, and people. And the people of Russia are wonderful people. But we do have a problem with the current regime, with Putin and with the Kremlin. It's crazy to me that Vladimir Putin said that the greatest tragedy of the 20th century was the collapse of the Warsaw Pact or of the Soviet Union. You know, look at the 20th century. There were a lot of bad things that happened in the 20th century. And I don't think he just said that by mistake. I think Putin is a guy who believes who still has that mentality, sort of a Soviet era, and who believes in spheres of influence, and that there's something illegitimate about countries in Europe wanting to be part of the EU or maybe even being part of NATO. And that can be a problem when you have a nation with a large military with nuclear weapons that believes that it should be allowed to have a sphere of influence where it can do what it wants in its neighbors, Georgia, Moldova, Ukraine. That's not the type of Europe that we all fought for, in the last century. So I hope that in the long run, Russia will rejoin, the community of nations, and we can all work together on important global issues. But for now, I think we've learned over the last few years that this regime in the Kremlin, Putin, is not willing to play by the rules of the post-war order, and so we're going to stand up against that, and we need to be strong against that.
Okay, another 2 questions.
Good afternoon. I want to ask you about President Guantanamo because he was talking about Obama, and I think he's a great president, but he say many times he won't close this prison and never done.
Yes.
Thank you.
It's a great question. I think it's a real disappointment to President Obama. It's a disappointment to me that he's been unable to close Guantanamo. It made me very proud when he was campaigning and he acknowledged. I think one of our strengths is we do acknowledge mistakes. We try. We don't always get things right. Sometimes we make mistakes. Guantanamo, I think is a great shame on our country. People were tortured there, by my country. This is acknowledged by the president, by the Senate, by the CIA. That's wrong. That's simply wrong. And unfortunately, President Obama has tried. The number of prisoners in Guantanamo now is, I think, less than 100. I don't know, Aaron, do you know that? Less than 100? Something like that. Anyway, it's much less than it was. The reason he's been unable is 2 main reasons. Close, okay. So there are 2 reasons. They're down to a small number of people. Most have been released, sent back to their countries. But the United States Congress, controlled by a party different than President Obama's party, passed laws that said no Guantanamo prisoners could be brought to the United States to be held in normal prisons or have normal trials there if needed. So he was blocked in that way. And then the second problem is that although many of these people were sent back to their countries, the remaining group, some of them are from countries that you can't send people back to. So for example, from Yemen, there's no real government in Yemen. You can't send people back to Yemen now. So there's this remaining group. Many of our European allies, or not just our European allies, countries around the world have stepped up and have taken in some of these Guantanamo detainees, some of whom, not all, but some of whom were 100% innocent, were swept up in some informant, got paid some money and said, this guy was a translator for Osama bin Laden, and they get swept up and find themselves in Guantanamo. So some European nations have taken small numbers in. President Obama is continuing to make a push, and he's going to try before January to get it closed. It doesn't look like it's going to be possible, but I'm still proud of him for trying. All we can do is try.
Thank you.
You can just pass it back.
Hello, Mr. Andrew, and I have a question. And I like American and 1863 years November, President Lincoln said, "A government for the people, by the people, of the people, shall not perish from the world." And my question is, how to develop that government?
How to develop that government in the United States? How did we develop that, or how can another country?
Yeah, how to develop for the people, by the people.
Sure.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's amazing to me, it's great to have somebody here quoting from the Gettysburg Address, a very famous speech by President Lincoln.
Yeah.
He wrote it on the back of an envelope when he was going to a scene of a terrible battle, Gettysburg, in our Civil War, where thousands of soldiers from the North and the South had died. And he said that these people died so that, or we should rededicate our efforts, so that government by the people, of the people, by the people, for the people, doesn't perish from the earth. And he was saying that in the middle of a civil war, when the country was divided, and our country was very different than it is today, because you had a large population of people who were slaves, meaning they were owned by other people. Women couldn't vote. Many times people who didn't have property could vote. And it has taken us, it's a continuing effort to have a government that is truly by the people, or of the people, by the people, and for the people. We haven't finished today, you know. In 1865, we ended slavery, but for decades, for 100 years after that, black people didn't have civil rights that were close to full civil rights, and we still don't. We still have not solved that issue. Women didn't get the vote till 1919 or 1920 in the U.S., and still, we don't have full participation by both genders in the United States. So I think the answer I would have is that the way you have government of the people, by the people, and for the people is by continuing to be self-critical. And to me, that's the mark of a strong country. A strong country can criticize itself and say, we've come a long way, we have more to go, we are not perfect. We need to bring in more citizens of all kinds. Women, minorities, the LGBT community, disabled people. We need to have a politics that is more transparent, more open. And you can do that in your countries too. We'll never quite get there. It's like the horizon. I don't know if the word horizon translates to everyone's languages, but you keep approaching and it goes further away, or like a rainbow. But you need to keep going.
Okay, thank you. And can I take a personal question?
Of course.
Yeah, and have anyone said you look like Sherlock?
Sure. I don't know that show. Is that it? Oh, Benedict Cumberbatch. You know, I'm not a big TV watcher. I hope that that's a good thing. I don't know. Is this a good thing? Oh yeah, I'll take it. If it's a compliment, I'll take it, and I'll say thank you.
Okay,
so.
Thank you.
Okay, some other questions over there, then here, and then there.
Hello? Oh, yeah. Good evening, Mr. Ambassador. Thank you for being here.
Where are you? Wait, I've lost you. Oh, hi. Hi.
Now, my question is like a follow-up to his question.
Sure.
It's not exactly the same thing. We all know that the crisis we have, I'm talking about the political crisis, from the Arab Spring, so Tunisia, Morocco, Algeria, and all that, was caused by trying to kind of get democracy in place in those countries. I mean, that's what we wish anyway. What do you think? Do you think we're making a mistake again with Syria somehow by trying to take out a president who's not necessarily very good, but at least holding the country? What's your opinion? Do you think we should be waiting a little bit to let it happen naturally? Or should we, like we've done some other places and it didn't work, push for it to happen? Because I think it's one of the causes of the problems we're having. But nobody's actually attacking it that way. But what's your opinion? I mean, in that sense.
No, it's a great question, and I think I've heard people say that. Many people have said that. And I take issue with the premise. So I think it is a widespread belief that many people have that the Arab Spring was something that was directed from the outside, and that it was a mistaken effort by the United States at nation building, and that we came in and said to people, you know, rise up. That's almost become a narrative now, you know? But it just has one problem. It's not actually true. So, you know, the Arab Spring is something that arose organically, and then we had a decision to make. Which side of history do we want to be on? Do we want to, as you know, as at times in our past we've done, say we're going to double down, and frankly, as Russia is doing now with Assad, and say we're going to go support a dictator, or are we going to stand back and say we support the people who are trying to bring themselves greater freedom? I don't believe that you can keep the lid on a boiling pot forever. And I think the longer you try to keep the lid on a boiling pot, the bigger the explosion is at the end. So I don't think that the narrative that is out there, that many people have, which is that somehow if the United States had just somehow done something different, the Arab Spring would never have happened. The Arab Spring was going to happen. It started happening of its own accord, and it was a question of, at that point, which side do we say we support? Syria was also organic. You know, it started with protests, and then with killings, and then with funeral marches, and then with more killings, and then with a civil war. At some point, when you start to see brutality, barbarism, the use of chemical weapons, now the bombing of an entire city just in an indiscriminate way. I think you have a moral obligation at least to say which side you support. So my feeling is that it would not, even if you could go back and redo history, there's not some great thing we could have done that would have kept the lid on, and we would just have a bunch of happy dictators with a lot of happy people. The final thing I'll say is what I said before, which is we don't always get everything right, but if you don't try, if you don't give democracy an opportunity, if you do something to try and stop it and kill it, then you really haven't lived up to your obligation as a free nation. And I would say, by the way, you know, some put Tunisia, modest success story. Algeria could go, you know, hard to say. I mean, Syria is the main problem. Syria is three-dimensional chess, and it's not just caused by one thing. Great question, though. Thanks.
Good afternoon. You talk about refugees, and you told us that you support them and they bring diversity and creativity. And I just want to say about like Donald Trump. Do you know that he said like a Muslim is not entering America if he's a president? And he told also like that he's going to build a wall in Mexico. What if he's become like next president? What is your opinion? What will happen?
Well, I can't frame my answer in terms of Donald Trump, but I can say that the current policy of the United States, as our President and our Secretary of State have said, and as our Constitution says, you cannot have a religious test for citizenship in the United States. You can't discriminate on the basis of citizenship. And the idea of banning an entire religion from entering the United States, a religion of 1.5 billion people around the world, from places as diverse, you know, from Indonesia to Morocco to, you know, Malaysia, is un-American. It's an un-American idea, and I'm glad that our current administration has spoken very, very clearly about that. We have many, many very successful, productive, patriotic Muslim citizens in the United States. In our embassy, you know, some of our best American most patriotic American employees our foreign service officers are American Muslims. You know, in our history, even though America is very proud of its diversity, in our history, people have always been afraid of the new group that's coming in, but we managed to get over it. So in the 1880s, 1890s, people were afraid of the Irish. They said there were signs at employment places, no Irish need apply. And then said, okay, well, the Irish can come in, but not Italians or people from Southern Europe because they're lazy or they look different. And then the Italians came and they said, okay, well, we can have the Irish and the Italians, but definitely no Chinese. We passed a law, a shameful law called the Chinese Exclusion Act, to change our immigration laws and keep the Chinese out because, well, they're very different from us. We won't be able to integrate them. And now, of course, Chinese Americans, you know, are some of our most productive and successful citizens. And oh, well, the Jews, they're different. They don't believe in Jesus, and who knows about that? You know, okay, well, now the Jews can come in. Now then it's the Mexicans. Well, we can take the Irish and the Italians and the Chinese and the Jews, but not the Mexicans because they're different and they're dangerous. You know, it's a pattern. It's a pattern that we've seen. Or now it's the Muslims. They're different. Well, all these other groups we could deal with, but these are somehow different. I don't buy it. I don't buy it.
Sorry. I'm from Mexico, and well, you know about these agreements that are between USA and Mexico, for example, the NAFTA. My question is, how bad do you think the relationship between these countries could be affected politically and economically?
How badly will if what?
Well, after the elections.
Yeah. You know, no matter who wins the election, it's going to be a little bit hard. Well, I think there will be some challenges for whoever wins the election on the day after, because it's been a very heated campaign with a lot of rhetoric about all different kinds of groups and people. And no matter who wins also, you'll still have a large chunk of the country that feels a little bit angry or upset because people are so polarized. So the job of the next president is going to be to reassure the half of the country, or the 40% that didn't vote for her or him, to feel like they're part of the country, and to reassure allies and our neighbors, like our wonderful neighbor, Mexico, that things haven't changed, and that we still value the partnership and the good friendly relationship that we have. That's going to be a challenge for the next president, you know, especially if it's one president rather than the other. So, time for one more or two more? Two more. Okay,
okay, one is here, and then the last one here, and that's it.
Good afternoon. Yeah. Good afternoon, Mr. Schapiro. I'm a student from China. So what I worry about is more about my academic studying in America, because I will go to America to go to
Seattle.
Yes,
yeah.
For my academic studying. So may I ask some suggestions for how can we deal with our academic studies?
Yeah, turn off your phone and when you're studying. You know, I watch my kids now, and there are so many distractions. And turn off your notifications so you don't get a Snapchat or an Instagram notification or a Facebook notification when you're in the middle of studying. Now, I mean, I'm half kidding with that. But I think the other thing I would say is don't just assume that, you know, these are the things that I'm good at and these are the things that I'm not good at. I think a lot of students say too early, you know, I'm strong in this and I'm not so good in that, and they close off a whole door for them. Sometimes maybe you just need a different professor. Sorry. It depends on the class. My daughter came back. My daughter's always said that she thinks she's a humanities person. And she's now in this school year, she said, you know what? I love chemistry. And it's because she has a wonderful chemistry teacher, and she's really good at it. You know, so I think I would say don't close off doors to yourself, but do close the notifications on your devices. All right, Last.
Okay, last question.
Hi, Andrew. Very happy to have you here. I'm going to wrap it up with a question about the election again. In one of your slides, you have showed Barack Obama, and you mentioned that you're going to really miss that guy. So we know that Barack Obama is in favor of Hillary. So we kind of can guess your preference. But in the last debate, Donald Trump mentioned that he will not accept, or he will not commit to accept the election results. Do you think that such a strong country as United States should have a leader that kind of talks down the democratic basic points?
What I can say is that the peaceful transfer of power and the gracious concession speech or phone call from the loser to the winner is a tradition. Well, I guess George Washington, well, he didn't lose, but there wasn't a phone in the 1790s, but it goes back to the beginning of our country. It is one of the foundations of any successful country that governs itself, is that people, at the end of the day, no matter how hard fought the election may be, no matter how frustrated people may be by the result, as many of us were frustrated in 2000 when you had this unprecedented situation with a recount between Bush and Gore. At the end of the day, even if you're not happy with the result, the loser calls up the winner and says, "Congratulations, you are the President of the United States, and how can I help you strengthen our country?" And that's what should happen now.
Who do you think is going to win?
The American people.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks very much. I'm really impressed. What great questions. Really, I can see why you're so proud of your students. It's a really smart group with unbelievable English. So I thank you.
Your Excellency, thank you very much for coming here. And I wanted to say something very similar what you have said, that for me, I don't say surprise, but I would rather say it's a very nice experience for me. It's first time that so many questions, so nice questions, so very different questions from very different students. So I am really proud of our students here. And I hope that for you, it will be, or it was, nice experience here as well. Thank you for your not only speech, introductory speech, but for the manner how you answered all the questions so very directly, so you didn't say like that. And I hope that we will have the chance to meet either you or again, let's say US ambassador earlier than another 7 years, which I have mentioned after Richard Graeber was here. So again, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you. What a great group. Thank you. They're really great. Sometimes you have students who are shy or afraid to ask.